The silverware clinked against bone china plates as waitstaff moved quietly between tables. Everyone dressed in their finest, the men in tailored suits, the women in evening wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. I sat at the main table, wearing the emerald dress my husband Everett had suggested would complement the event decor. Of course it would. He'd planned everything about this company dinner down to the last detail. Everett rose from his seat, champagne flute in hand. The room hushed immediately. He commanded that kind of attention without trying. "Tonight we celebrate exceeding our quarterly projections by 37%, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. Applause rippled through the crowd of executives and their spouses. I clapped along mechanically, my smile fixed in place like it had been superglued. 12 years of practice made it look genuine. Everett continued, "While I appreciate the accolades coming my way, the true architect behind our success stands right here." He turned toward Camille, his executive assistant, who sat 3 seats away from me. "This woman," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate tone I once thought was reserved for me, "is the toughest, most brilliant mind in our industry, not someone you can toy with or underestimate." Camille's lips curled into a modest smile that didn't hide her triumph. She wore a fitted black dress with a single strand of pearls that drew attention to her slender neck. "To Camille," Everett continued, "the backbone of everything we've accomplished, the woman who makes impossible things happen daily." The room erupted in agreement. "Here, here." Several executives nodded knowingly at each other. I caught whispers, "She's extraordinary," and "he'd be lost without her." I sat perfectly still, champagne untouched, as something cold and hard formed in my chest. Not just because of the praise he lavished on her, praise I hadn't received in years, but because of how he looked at her, the slight lean of his body whenever she spoke. The inside jokes contained in glances swept between them. What cut deepest wasn't jealousy. It was invisibility. I had postponed my career in financial analysis to help build this company from nothing. I'd spent nights poring over business plans with Everett in our tiny apartment when we couldn't afford an office. I'd hosted dinners with potential investors, prepared presentations, even cleaned the company's first real office space when we couldn't afford janitorial services. Now I was just decoration. The silent wife who everyone assumed spent her days choosing throw pillows. By the time dessert arrived, my throat had tightened so much I couldn't swallow. I excused myself, mentioning a migraine. Neither Everett nor Camille looked up as I left. At home, I kicked off my heels in the darkened foyer of our minimalist mansion. The house felt as hollow as our marriage. I poured a glass of water and sat in the living room, staring out at the city lights below. Something had been nagging at me for months. Financial reports that didn't quite align. Investors Everett claimed to have met in Chicago when his location app showed him in New York. Late nights that produced no visible work product. At 3:17 a.m., I heard his key in the lock. From the shadowed hallway, I watched him stumble slightly, loosen his tie, and head straight for the guest bedroom, not our room, which had become his pattern on most nights. I waited until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then I moved silently to where he'd dropped his messenger bag. The leather was buttery soft, a gift I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. His laptop was inside, still warm. The password ought to have stumped me. He'd changed it months ago. But tonight, something made me type in Camille 1234. The screen unlocked. What I found in the next 2 hours shredded what remained of my heart. Messages between them dating back 18 months. Weekend trips disguised as business travel. But worse than the affair was what lay beneath it. Financial manipulation on a scale that took my breath away. Client money rerouted. Fabricated investment returns. A plan to cash out and disappear just before the inevitable collapse, leaving everyone else, investors, employees, partners, to suffer the consequences. And there, in a series of messages, they discussed me. "What about your wife?" Camille had asked. "The little homemaker? She bakes cookies while we build empires. She won't have a clue until it's done. I've already spoken with my attorney about minimizing her settlement." They'd planned everything. Their exit, their new life together, my financial ruin. One particular exchange burned itself into my retinas. "She still thinks she contributed to the company's early success," Everett had written. "That's adorable," Camille replied, "as if organizing dinner parties is the same as what we do." By 5:30 a.m., I'd gone through everything. Twice. My entire body trembled, not with sadness, but with a cold, clear rage I'd never experienced before. I looked toward the guest room where my husband slept, unaware that everything had changed. Before I continue with what happened next, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been underestimated? Ever had someone pat your head and dismiss your capabilities while you smiled politely? If this story resonates with you at all, press that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about people who learned too late that they'd misjudged someone's strength. Now, back to my story. My name is Astrid, and until that night, most people who knew me would describe me as Everett's pleasant wife. Some might add former financial analyst as an afterthought. Few remembered I graduated top of my class with dual degrees in finance and computer science before putting my career on hold to support my husband's ambitions. Everett and I met at a financial technology conference where I presented research on detecting patterns of financial manipulation. Ironic, considering where we ended up. He was charming, brilliant, and hungry to create something revolutionary. I fell for his vision as much as for him. When he proposed launching a financial services company that would democratize investment opportunities previously reserved for the wealthy, I believed in his mission completely. We married 6 months after meeting, and I postponed my PhD program to help build his dream. The early years were exhilarating. Working side by side, we secured our first investors, developed proprietary analytical tools, and gradually built a reputation for excellence. I handled our financial projections, risk assessments, and investor relations, while Everett became the charismatic face of the company. As we grew, Everett insisted we needed to appear more traditional to certain conservative investors. They expect a CEO with a supportive wife, not a business partner, he'd explained, just temporarily until we're established. I reluctantly stepped back from daily operations, taking on the role of corporate spouse, hosting dinners, attending charity events, building the social connections every successful company needs. It was supposed to be temporary. Then Camille arrived, polished, efficient, with razor-sharp instincts for business opportunity. Everett hired her 5 years ago as his executive assistant, but she quickly became indispensable. Within 2 years, she was effectively his second in command, though her title remained the same. I noticed the shift in our dynamic immediately. Everett stopped sharing company details with me. He no longer asked for my input on strategic decisions or brought work home to discuss. When I inquired about certain investments that seemed questionable, he brushed me off. "The markets have evolved," he'd say. "These are complex strategies that would take too long to explain." I tried maintaining my connection to the company by attending quarterly review meetings as a silent observer. That's when I first noticed discrepancies in the financial reports. Expense categories that didn't make sense. Client funds that seemed to disappear into vaguely named holding accounts. When I questioned these, Everett grew defensive. "This is why I don't involve you anymore," he snapped. "You don't understand modern financial structures." But I did understand. That was the problem. I began to track the discrepancies privately, creating a separate spreadsheet where I noted every questionable transaction. For months, I told myself there must be legitimate explanations, that my husband couldn't possibly be doing what the numbers suggested. Then came subtle changes at home. Everett worked later, traveled more. Our conversations grew shallow. He claimed exhaustion when I initiated intimacy. Classic signs I willfully ignored until they became impossible to dismiss. The night of the company dinner was merely the final confirmation of what I'd already begun to suspect. My husband was not just having an affair with his assistant, they were partners in something much darker. As dawn broke, I made tea with trembling hands, watching sunlight crawl across our expensive kitchen countertops. Everything in this house, everything in our life together, was built on a foundation that was about to collapse. And Everett had ensured I would collapse with it. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. From the messages I'd read, I knew Everett and Camille planned to attend, present misleadingly positive quarterly reports, then announce their departures 2 weeks later. Long enough to transfer the final assets, but soon enough to escape before anyone discovered the truth. I checked the time. 6:23 a.m. The world as I knew it had ended during the night. Now I had less than 4 hours to decide what to do with that knowledge. I walked slowly through our spacious home, touching surfaces, remembering moments, the dining room where we'd hosted our first investor dinner, the study where we'd stayed up all night finalizing our business plan, the bedroom where we'd once whispered our dreams to each other. At 7 a.m., I made 2 phone calls, the first to Anton, our largest investor and chairman of the board, the second to Layla, our chief financial officer, a woman Everett had repeatedly tried to edge out because she asked too many questions. "Something urgent has come up regarding today's board presentation," I told them both. I need to meet with you before everyone else arrives. My voice sounded strange even to myself, lower, steadier, stripped of its usual warmth. It was the voice of someone with nothing left to lose. While waiting for their responses, I showered and dressed with unusual care, not in one of my typical understated outfits, but in a sharp burgundy suit I'd purchased years ago and never worn. I applied makeup with precision, swept my hair into a severe knot, and added my grandmother's platinum earrings, the only inheritance I'd received from a woman who had survived her own betrayals. As I finished, my phone chimed with messages from both Anton and Layla. They would meet me at 8:30, an hour and a half before the scheduled board meeting. I gathered the materials I'd prepared, placed them in a leather portfolio, and took one last look around the house I would likely never see again after today. Then I drove to the office for what would be my final act as Everett's wife. The company headquarters stood gleaming in the morning sunlight, 40 stories of glass and steel announcing success to the world. I'd helped select the artwork in the lobby 5 years ago when we moved in, abstract pieces in blues and grays that complemented the corporate aesthetic while adding a touch of humanity. Today they looked cold and distant, like artifacts from another life. The security guard brightened when he saw me. "Mrs. Astrid, haven't seen you in a while." "Good morning, George. Is the Aspen conference room available?" "For you?" "Always," he winked conspiratorially. "Should I notify Mr. Everett you're here?" "No need. He'll be in later." My smile felt mechanical, but George didn't notice. I rode the elevator to the 38th floor, nodding at employees who recognized me. Most seemed surprised to see me there without Everett, especially so early. A few whispered after I passed. I wondered what they'd heard, what they suspected. Layla arrived first, punctual as always. At 52, she was the oldest member of the executive team and the only one who'd consistently treated me as more than an ornament. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back, her expression cautious. "Astrid," she said, embracing me briefly. "This sounded urgent." "It is. Let's wait for Anton." We sat in silence until Anton strode in exactly at 8:30. Tall and imposing, he'd made his fortune in manufacturing before becoming our primary investor. He'd always been cordial to me, but never warm. "Astrid," he acknowledged, setting down his briefcase. "Your call was unexpected. What's this about?" I closed the door and dimmed the glass walls for privacy before speaking. "The quarterly report Everett plans to present today contains fabricated numbers." Anton's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact I can prove." I opened my portfolio and laid out several documents. "For the past 8 months, I've noticed irregularities in our financial reporting. Client funds have been diverted through a complicated series of transfers that disguise their ultimate destination." Layla leaned forward, scanning the pages with increasing alarm. "How did you access these?" "I built the original financial tracking system when we started the company. I still understand how it works." I didn't mention Everett's laptop or the 3 a.m. discovery. "Not yet. These transactions," I continued, pointing to a highlighted section, "supposedly represent investments in emerging market opportunities. But I traced them. There are no actual investments. The money moves through 3 different holdings before landing in private accounts." Anton's face had gone pale. "How much?" "Approximately 68 million. The silence that followed was profound. Anton loosened his tie slightly. Layla closed her eyes. "There's more," I said quietly. "Everett and Camille plan to announce their departures after securing end-of-quarter bonuses. They've already established new identities and banking relationships overseas." "You have proof of this?" Anton demanded. I hesitated, then nodded. "I do." "Why are you bringing this to us?" Layla asked, her voice gentle but probing. "Why not go directly to authorities?" The question hit me harder than expected. Why indeed? I'd asked myself the same thing during my sleepless night. "Because this company represents more than Everett's ambition," I said finally. "It represents 12 years of my life, the jobs of 300 employees, the investments of people who trusted us." I looked directly at Anton. I wanted to give the board an opportunity to handle this internally first. What I didn't say. I wanted to witness Everett's fall personally. I wanted to see his face when he realized who had destroyed him. Anton studied me for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Harold," he said, naming the company's general counsel, "and postponing the full board meeting until 11. Layla gathered the papers I'd brought, her hands shaking slightly. "If this is accurate, Astrid, you've potentially saved the company." "If," Anton emphasized, still watching me carefully. I met his gaze without flinching. "Check everything I've shown you. You'll find it's all accurate." Over the next hour, Layla and Harold verified my findings while Anton made calls, his voice low and intense. I sat calmly, answering questions when asked, otherwise watching as they processed the magnitude of what was happening. At 9:45, Everett texted me, "Where are you? Thought you'd sleep in after last night's migraine." I didn't respond. At 10:15, Anton finished his final call and turned to me. "We've frozen the suspicious accounts pending investigation. Security has been instructed to escort Everett and Camille directly to the Oak Room when they arrive." The Oak Room, our smallest boardroom, used for sensitive discussions and, occasionally, terminations. I'd never been inside. "I'd like to be present," I said. Anton shook his head. "That's not appropriate under the circumstances." "I discovered the fraud. I brought it to your attention. I deserve to be there." "You're his wife," Anton countered. "And that disqualifies me?" My voice took on an edge that made him blink. "I built this company alongside him before being sidelined. I've lost my marriage, my home, and potentially my financial security because of his actions. I will be in that room." Anton and Layla exchanged glances. Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Fine," Anton conceded, "but you don't speak unless I indicate you should." We relocated to the Oak Room just as security called to notify us that Everett and Camille had arrived in the lobby. Through the glass walls, I watched them emerge from the elevator together. They weren't touching, maintaining professional distance, but their body language screamed intimacy. The slight tilt of her head toward him, the way his hand hovered near her lower back without quite making contact. Camille spotted me first. Her step faltered, confusion crossing her face before she recovered. She nudged Everett, who looked up and froze momentarily. I saw the calculations happening behind his eyes. Why was I here? What did it mean? How should he play this? He decided on concerned husband. "Astrid," he called as they approached. "What are you doing here? Are you feeling better?" "Much," I replied, my voice neutral. "Good morning, Camille." She nodded tersely, clutching her tablet tighter. Security directed them into the Oak Room, where Anton, Layla, Harold, and 2 board members I recognized were seated. Everett's confident expression wavered slightly when he saw the assembly. "What's this?" "The board meeting is scheduled in the main conference room at 10, he said. "Change of plans," Anton replied. "Please, sit." Everett and Camille exchanged glances before taking seats at the far end of the table, as far from me as possible. I noted with grim satisfaction how quickly they'd aligned physically once they sensed danger. Anton remained standing. "Before we begin, I want to be clear that this meeting is being recorded for legal purposes. Do you both consent to this recording?" "What is this about?" Everett demanded, ignoring the question. "Answer the question, please, Mr. Everett," Harold interjected. "Fine, yes, whatever. Can someone explain what's happening?" Camille nodded her consent as well, her eyes darting between faces, assessing the situation with growing alarm. "We've discovered significant financial irregularities that require immediate attention," Anton stated flatly. "Specifically, the unauthorized diversion of approximately $68 million in client funds to private accounts." The color drained from Everett's face, but he recovered quickly. "That's absurd. Our financial reporting is transparent and verified quarterly by external auditors." "The auditors examine what they're shown," Layla countered, pushing several documents toward him. "These transactions were deliberately structured to evade standard oversight." Everett glanced at the papers without touching them. "I don't know what you think you've found, but there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Perhaps if you'd brought these concerns to me directly instead of staging whatever this is." "There's no misunderstanding," Anton cut in. "We've verified everything independently this morning." Camille had remained silent, her posture rigid, but now she spoke. "These allegations are completely unfounded. As the person who oversees much of our operational reporting, I can assure you—" "Miss Camille," Anton interrupted, "I suggest you consider your next words very carefully. We have concrete evidence linking both of you to these fraudulent activities." "What evidence?" Everett challenged, his confidence returning. "Some accounting discrepancies that could have perfectly legitimate explanations? That's hardly." "We also have your communications," I said quietly. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Anton shot me a warning look, but I continued anyway. "The detailed plans between you and Camille, the offshore accounts, the timeline for your departures, your discussions about how to minimize my settlement in our divorce." Everett stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time that morning. "You went through my private communications? That's illegal. Anything she found is inadmissible," he said to Harold. "Not when it's discovered on a shared marital device," Harold replied. And regardless, we've now independently verified the financial irregularities. Everett turned back to me, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. Astrid, he said, his voice softening, you've misunderstood what you saw. Yes, Camille and I have been working on a special project, but it's completely legitimate. If you'd just asked me. Like you asked me before you began stealing from our clients? I replied. Or before you planned to leave me financially ruined? That's not. Don't. I cut him off. Don't insult what's left of our relationship by lying to my face. Camille suddenly stood. I need to speak with my attorney before continuing this discussion. Sit down, Anton ordered. Nobody is leaving this room yet. You can't hold us here, she countered. Actually, Harold interjected, given the nature and scale of the alleged fraud, we've involved federal authorities. They've requested everyone remain on premises until their agents arrive. Everett's face contorted with rage. You called the feds? Based on what? Some paranoid delusions from my wife who's clearly jealous of my professional relationship with Camille? Your professional relationship? I echoed, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Is that what you call it in the 4-star hotels you visit together? Or in the apartment you leased in Brookside under a false name? Camille went completely still. You know about Brookside? I know everything. The words hung between us like a physical presence. Every message, every transaction, every lie. Everett leaned toward me, desperation replacing his anger. Astrid, listen to me. Whatever you think you know, we can work through this together. You and me. He reached for my hand. I withdrew it before he could touch me. Did you really think I was that blind? I asked quietly. That I wouldn't notice what was happening? Or did you just think I was too weak to do anything about it? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mine did too, simultaneously. Then Camille's. Then every phone in the room. A news alert. Everett read it first. His face went ashen. What have you done? He whispered. I didn't answer Everett. Instead, I watched as everyone in the room absorbed the breaking news alert illuminating their screens. Financial services giant under federal investigation for massive client fund misappropriation. The headline blared. The article named our company, Everett, and Camille specifically. Anton's face reddened. You went to the press? He demanded, turning to me. No. My response was truthful. I didn't contact any journalists, but I knew exactly where the leak had come from. What Everett didn't know was that I'd maintained relationships with several financial reporters over the years, connections I'd cultivated during my active days with the company. Journalists who respected my financial acumen and occasionally sought my unofficial perspective on industry trends. One of them had texted me 3 days ago about rumors of unusual activity at our company. I hadn't responded then, but at 7:45 this morning I'd sent her a single message. Check today's board meeting agenda. No details, no accusations. Just a gentle nudge in the right direction for someone who already suspected something. Camille collapsed back into her chair, fingers frantically tapping at her phone. This is impossible, she muttered. We were careful. Nobody knew. I knew, I reminded her softly. Everett stared at me with dawning horror. What else have you done? Before I could respond, the door opened, and 2 people in dark suits entered, followed by our head of security. The woman showed her credentials to Anton. Special Agent Teresa Walsh. FBI Financial Crimes Division. This is my colleague, Agent Patel. We understand you're holding an emergency board meeting regarding potential securities fraud? Everett shot to his feet. This is outrageous. Whatever you've been told is grossly inaccurate. Sir, I suggest you sit down. Agent Walsh interrupted. We're here based on evidence submitted to our office approximately 90 minutes ago, which we've had our cybercrime team analyzing since then. Evidence? What evidence? Everett demanded. Detailed transaction records showing systematic misappropriation of client funds, she replied coolly, along with communication logs suggesting premeditated intent to defraud. That's private correspondence illegally obtained by my wife, Everett shouted, pointing at me. She broke into my computer. Agent Walsh raised an eyebrow. Actually, sir, the evidence we're acting on came from your company's secure cloud storage, accessed using proper administrative credentials. Everett froze, confusion flickering across his face. I allowed myself a small smile then. He'd forgotten, or never bothered to learn, that I'd designed our original data storage architecture years ago. The admin access I'd maintained wasn't an oversight. It was insurance I'd never expected to need. We'll need to take formal statements, Agent Patel said, addressing the room, and we have warrants to secure certain electronic devices and files. Camille suddenly lunged for her purse. Agent Walsh moved with surprising speed for someone in a suit, intercepting her before she could reach it. Ma'am, please keep your hands visible. I just need my medication, Camille protested weakly. Anton turned to me while the agents conferred with Harold. Did you know this would happen today? The federal agents? I suspected it might, I admitted. Financial crimes of this magnitude attract attention quickly once exposed. Everett was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger or fear, but a kind of bewildered respect. I never thought you'd do something like this, he said quietly, so only I could hear. You were always so accommodating. That was your mistake, I replied, confusing accommodation with weakness. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of formal statements and procedural discussions. Everett and Camille were separated, each accompanied by an agent. The board members huddled with legal counsel, assessing damage control options. I sat apart, watching it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. Anton approached me during a lull. The board needs to understand your role in all this, Astrid. How long have you known what was happening? I suspected for months. I confirmed it last night. And you chose to handle it this way? A public scandal that could destroy the company? His question stung more than he knew. Did he really think I hadn't considered the consequences? That I'd acted purely from vengeance without weighing the impact on hundreds of innocent employees? The company was already being destroyed from within, I said carefully. Everett and Camille had diverted enough funds that collapse was inevitable within months. My actions accelerated the timeline but potentially saved what could be salvaged. Anton studied my face. There could have been quieter ways to address this. Perhaps. But quiet solutions often protect the guilty more than the innocent. He had no response to that. By early afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond the confines of our boardroom. News vans gathered outside the building, employees huddled in groups, whispering anxiously as rumors spread. Major clients began calling, demanding explanations and assurances about their assets. Layla found me in a small break room where I'd retreated to gather my thoughts. She closed the door behind her. The executive team is meeting in 10 minutes to formulate our response. As the one who uncovered this, your insight would be valuable. I shook my head. I'm not part of the executive team. Everett made that clear years ago. Things have changed. She passed me a folder. Anton asked me to give you this. Inside was a preliminary assessment of the damage, which accounts had been compromised, which clients were at highest risk, which assets remained secure. The final page contained a handwritten note from Anton. We need your expertise now more than we ever have. I almost laughed at the irony. Tell Anton I appreciate his sudden recognition of my capabilities, but I have other priorities right now. Such as, I met her gaze steadily, ensuring that what happened here can never be buried or minimized. She nodded slowly. You know, I always wondered why you stepped back from the company. You were sharper than most of the men in the C-suite, including your husband. Everett convinced me it was best for the company's image, I admitted. The traditional CEO with the supportive wife. I believed him because I wanted to believe our success mattered more than my ambitions. And now? I closed the folder and handed it back to her. Now I know better. As afternoon faded into evening, I remained at the office, watching the dismantling of the life I'd helped build. Everett and Camille were formally arrested around 4 p.m., led out through a side entrance to avoid the media. I caught a glimpse of Everett's face as they escorted him past the conference room where I sat. He looked suddenly older, diminished. For a brief moment, our eyes met through the glass. I expected to see hatred, but what flashed across his face looked more like grudging admiration. Then he was gone. Around 6 p.m., most of the staff had been sent home. Only key executives, legal counsel, and federal agents remained, working through the labyrinth of compromised accounts and misappropriated funds. I gathered my things, preparing to leave, when Layla appeared again. Anton would like a word before you go. I followed her to what had been Everett's office until this morning. Anton sat behind the massive desk, looking exhausted. Sit, please, he said, gesturing to a chair. I remained standing. I'm tired, Anton. Whatever this is can wait until tomorrow. It can't, actually. He pushed a document across the desk toward me. The board held an emergency session an hour ago. We voted unanimously to appoint you as interim CEO. I stared at him. That's absurd. Is it? You know the company better than anyone. You built its foundational systems. You uncovered a massive fraud that everyone else missed. And most importantly, you're the only person our major clients might still trust. I'm also the wife of the man who just got arrested for defrauding those same clients. Ex-wife, I assume, he countered. Unless you're planning a prison wedding. The attempt at humor fell flat. I picked up the document and skimmed it. The terms were surprisingly generous. Why would you trust me with this? I asked finally. For all you know, I could have been complicit. Were you? No, but you have only my word for that. Anton leaned back. Actually, we have more than your word. We have the fact that you exposed the fraud at considerable personal cost. And we have the results of the background checks our security team ran on you this afternoon. That surprised me. You investigated me? Of course we did. Standard procedure when appointing anyone to a C-suite position. He allowed himself a small smile. You came back cleaner than any of us expected, given the circumstances. I set the document down. I need time to think about this. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, we'll need to move forward with or without you. I nodded and turned to leave, my mind spinning with the unexpected proposition. Astrid, Anton called as I reached the door. One more thing. Agent Walsh mentioned something interesting. She said the evidence package they received was unusually comprehensive. Almost as if the person who compiled it had been gathering information for months, not hours. I kept my expression neutral. What's your point? My point is, I wonder how long you've been planning this. Whether today's events were as spontaneous as you've suggested. I thought carefully before answering. Does it matter? The outcome would be the same. Perhaps not, but it might change how I assess your character. I met his gaze steadily. My character isn't what's at stake here, Anton. It's the future of this company and everyone who depends on it. With that, I left, walking through the nearly empty office toward the elevator. Employees who remained watched me pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to resentment to cautious respect. As the elevator doors closed, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully for the first time since the previous night. Phase 1 was complete. Everett and Camille were facing criminal charges. The board knew the truth. The company had a chance at survival. But my plan wasn't finished yet, not even close. Because what no one had asked, not Anton, not Layla, not even the FBI, was where the missing $68 million had actually gone. They assumed they knew. The agents were already pursuing freezing orders on the accounts identified in the evidence I'd provided. What they didn't know was that those accounts were merely the first layer of an elaborate shell game, one that Everett had designed, but that I had quietly monitored and mapped for months. As I reached my car in the now empty parking garage, my phone vibrated with a notification, a secure message from a number I'd memorized but never saved in my contacts. It contained a single line, Phase 2, ready when you are. I drove to an unfamiliar part of the city, following directions on my phone to a modest office building in an area dominated by tech startups. The security guard barely glanced at the temporary badge I'd been instructed to print before waving me through. Suite 704 had no signage, just a plain gray door with a keypad. I entered the 6-digit code I'd memorized weeks ago and stepped into a sparsely furnished room where 3 people waited. Right on time, said Raven, rising from behind a desk cluttered with monitors. In her early 30s with close-cropped hair and intense eyes, she'd been my unexpected ally for the past 6 months. Beside her stood Malik, a former federal prosecutor who'd left government service after becoming disillusioned with how white-collar criminals repeatedly escaped justice. The third person, an older woman named Joanne, had been one of our company's first employees before Everett pushed her into early retirement. It's done, I said, sinking into an empty chair. Everett and Camille are in custody. The board knows everything. Almost everything, Malik corrected, sliding a cup of tea toward me. They know what we wanted them to know. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt. Anton offered me the interim CEO position. Raven's eyebrows shot up. That wasn't part of the plan. No, I agreed. It wasn't. Will you take it? Joanne asked. I considered the question. It would give us access we hadn't anticipated. It would also put you under intense scrutiny, Malik warned. Every decision questioned, every move watched. That scrutiny might be useful, I mused. A distraction from what's actually happening. Raven turned to one of her monitors. Speaking of what's actually happening, Phase 2 completed while you were in transit. All 68 million successfully rerouted through the tertiary channels. My heart raced despite my exhaustion. Any flags? None. The algorithms performed exactly as designed. By the time anyone traces past the initial accounts you exposed, the money will be where it belongs. Where it belongs. The phrase echoed in my mind, carrying the weight of everything we'd done, everything still to come. 6 months ago, I discovered the first signs of Everett's betrayal. Not just of me, but of the clients who trusted our company with their financial futures. Small investors who'd put their life savings into our hands. entrepreneurs who'd entrusted their business capital to our management. What Everett and Camille had been stealing wasn't just money. It was college funds for children, retirement security for the elderly, startups that would never launch. When I realized the scope of their scheme, I could have gone directly to authorities. Instead, I began building something harder to dismantle: irrefutable evidence coupled with a plan to make things right. I recruited Raven first, a brilliant programmer I'd met years earlier at a Women in Tech conference. She helped me create software that could track Everett's financial manipulations without detection. Malik joined next, bringing legal expertise and connections to ensure our counter-operations stayed within bounds that would hold up in court. Joanne came last, providing insider knowledge of company operations and client relationships that proved invaluable. Together, we spent months tracking every dollar Everett and Camille diverted. But instead of simply exposing their theft, we built a parallel system, one that would activate the moment they were apprehended. While federal agents focused on the most obvious layer of fraudulent accounts, our algorithms were redistributing the stolen funds back to their rightful owners, disguised as precautionary security transfers initiated by the company's risk management system. By tomorrow morning, every client who'd been defrauded would find their accounts mysteriously restored, with additional interest as compensation for potential distress. The company would appear to have acted with remarkable speed and integrity to protect client assets, a narrative that would help rebuild trust and potentially save hundreds of jobs. "What about us?" Joanne asked quietly, interrupting my thoughts. "After all this?" I looked at my three unlikely co-conspirators. None of us had sought personal gain. Our motivation had been justice, not just for me, but for everyone harmed by Everett's actions. "We disappear from the narrative," I replied. "That was always the agreement." Malik nodded. "The fewer people who know exactly how the clients were made whole, the better. The official story will be that the company's existing safeguards worked as designed." "And your role as potential CEO?" Raven pressed. I hadn't fully decided until that moment. "I'll accept it temporarily, long enough to ensure the transition succeeds, then step aside." This was never about taking Everett's place. The room fell silent as we all contemplated the road ahead. Dawn was only hours away, bringing with it news cycles that would dissect every aspect of the scandal. My name would be everywhere, the betrayed wife who exposed her husband's crimes. Speculation would run rampant. But no one would know the full truth except the 4 people in this room. "There's one thing I still don't understand," Joanne said finally. "How did you know? Not just about the fraud, but about Camille. What made you start looking in the first place?" I considered my answer carefully. Little things, changes in patterns, questions he stopped answering. But mostly, I paused, remembering the moment everything shifted. It was how he looked at her during meetings, the same way he used to look at me when we first built the company together, like she was the only person who truly understood his vision. My phone chimed with a text from Anton. "Decision by 8 a.m. I typed a brief confirmation, then looked up at my 3 allies. "Whatever happens next, remember that we succeeded, not just in exposing the crime, but in making it right." Raven raised her teacup to invisible justice. We touched our cups together in a silent toast, then spent the next hour finalizing details before going our separate ways. Dawn found me sitting on a bench overlooking the harbor, watching fishing boats head out for their daily catch. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls I wasn't ready to answer. A text from an unknown number appeared. Phase 3 complete. All funds restored. System logs show company safeguards as initiator. No trace to us. I deleted it immediately, feeling the final weight lift from my shoulders. What happened next would play out in court proceedings and news headlines for months. Everett and Camille would face justice for their crimes. The company would recover, perhaps stronger for having survived this test. I would step into temporary leadership, then find my own path forward once the storm passed. But in this moment, watching the sun rise over calm waters, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not because I'd destroyed my husband's carefully constructed facade, not because I'd outsmarted those who underestimated me, but because I'd stayed true to my own moral compass when it would have been easier to walk away. Sometimes victory isn't about who ends up with the most power. Sometimes it's about remembering who you are when everything else falls apart. My phone rang again. Anton, probably impatient for my answer about the CEO position. This time, I picked up. "I've made my decision," I said without preamble. "But first, we need to discuss something important about our client accounts." As I began explaining the mysterious restoration of funds that was about to be discovered, I smiled at the sunrise. Everett had called Camille tough, brilliant, someone who couldn't be toyed with. He just never realized he was describing me. If you enjoyed this story about underestimated strength and justice served cold, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about people who discover their power in unexpected ways. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove someone wrong at exactly the right moment? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully.